What's up, boners? The Skull Seeker here. Today I'm going to be comparing the skulls of a grizzly bear and an African lion. So first we have the largest grizzly bear skull. This is approximately 17 inches, a little bit over. So this is essentially a maximum size grizzly bear. You're not going to see grizzly bears larger than this, at least not very typically. It'd be an extremely rare case for a grizzly bear to have a skull larger than this. So this is essentially the maximum size grizzly bear. And then we have over here the maximum size African lion. So this one is a little over 15 inches, and this is essentially the biggest an African lion will get. Typically they'll be smaller than this. This is an exceptionally large male. So we're going to start comparing these. So first we have the African lion. We'll take a look at this. So first thing you'll notice, very large canine teeth, large outer incisors. So if we take the ruler here and measure these, essentially we would have, we'll do this in centimeters. So we start from this edge of the tooth. That is almost, just around 6 centimeters. So very large canine tooth. Then the one on the lower jaw, we have about 4.5 centimeters on the lower jaw canine teeth. And essentially there is a lot more of this that would actually be in the root. So this all up here is the root. So you have a total tooth that is about this long from my pointer finger to my thumb. So that total size is around around 13 centimeters without the curve. So if you curved it, curving here, it would be longer than 13 centimeters. But yeah, so very big skull. We have this large sagittal crest. If we turn this to this view, you can see very defined crest here. The muscles will spread going down here and curve into the lower jaw, and then that provides it with an extremely powerful bite force. So essentially the whole back of the lion's head is just muscle that attaches onto the skull here and goes through the zygomatic arch onto the lower jaw. So this whole thing back here is muscle attachment. This whole area on the cranium is essentially just muscle attachment. So extremely powerful bite force. And then able to open his jaws to around here at the absolute maximum. So that's an extremely large gape. If you kind of compare this with several other things you've seen, essentially this is extremely massive. Nearly, for a cat this is pretty average in terms of like actual angle, but in terms of several other mammals, this is a pretty wide gape. So as you can see here, we have extremely large canines as mentioned, and then an extremely large gape. So essentially this, if I were to, well, first let me actually measure this. So if we put this in here and then put it at the maximum angle, with the gap, like we'll say the remaining space in between the teeth from tooth to tooth, that is 28 centimeters, which is just a little bit over 11 inches. So yeah, about 11 1/3. So anyway, very large gape. And then with this, you can see this would very efficiently fit around a human throat, and that right there would quickly end you. So you can see there, just goes right around my neck. So pretty efficient, pretty deadly. But yeah, and these guys would be going for the throat. So these canine teeth would essentially puncture in here and then rip out the throat and suffocate the prey animal. now. Moving on to the grizzly bear. Here we go. So the grizzly bear, this one, if we take a look at the top, so you can see it still has a very defined crest. However, it's more defined in the back part right here than in the front. The brain case is still large. Since this is a larger skull than the lion's, it does have a larger brain. However, if we're talking about proportions, the lion would have a larger brain proportionate to its body size and head size. So here's the brain case essentially. Muscle attachment goes here and flows down into the lower jaw. And then same thing on this side, curves down into the jaw here. So large sagittal crest, nowhere near the size of the lion's though. Then you can see the shape of this skull is essentially kind of more rounded in the back and then comes to a point with the front. So that's how that works. Then we take a look at the jaws. So this essentially opens to right here. So once again, very large gape there. And if we measure this, that is from tooth to tooth is about 8.5 inches or about 21 centimeters. So very large gape again with the grizzly bear. Once again, this could easily latch onto a throat and bite down. However, since this is a bear rather than a cat, it has slightly more elongated jaws. So this one can actually, if my throat was all the way in the back, it would go literally all the way around my neck and just completely bite through there. So extremely powerful jaw muscles, extremely powerful bite. The claws on these guys could easily decapitate a human with a single swipe. These teeth are also going to be very efficient in decapitating a human. Also, just going for the face, essentially this would just rip a huge chunk out of the face. If it were to bite down, it would just easily bite through you and you would be missing your face, which happens to real people, and that is not something that is pleasant to look at or to have happen to you. So the nose, large nasal cavity in here. We compare that to the lion, and the lion also has a large nasal cavity. They are about the same width in terms of available space in there. However, the grizzly bear's canal is a little bit deeper, which is also evidenced by the fact that the skull is longer, it's more elongated. So the eyes, you'll notice the lion has these massive eyes. So its eyes are like just slightly smaller than tennis balls here. And of course, binocular vision. The bear, its eyes are slightly larger than golf balls. And again, binocular vision. But yeah, its eyes are actually smaller proportionately and in actual size than the lion's. But once again, longer snout, and it has a diastema here where there's a gap between the premolars and then the canines. And essentially they just have a more elongated face than the lion and other cats, because these guys still have a tiny bit of a diastema, but not much at all. But yeah, comparing these, you can see the front of both and the eyes on the lion are a lot larger here. Also looking at the canine teeth, the lion has longer teeth proportionately. When you compare the canines, they're about the same size, but the lions are still a bit larger. The undersides here, so there they are. And of course, if we want to look at the, let's see. If we want to look at the view here, comparing these, give me a second. So here we are, lining them up. We have, this is about how they would line up. I guess I need to go back a bit. That jaw's gonna fall. Bear's a bit too big, but that's okay. So we can see here they are. They are very similar in length. However, the bear is still a bit larger. If we line up the occipital condyles, essentially it would go here, which means the lion has a lot larger of a sagittal crest, and then the snout is a lot shorter than the bear. So obviously, once again, bears have a much more elongated face than cats do. Especially if you think of like domestic cats, really short faces, as opposed to things like dogs and bears, even weasels. So, but here we go from the top view, and you can see the width also. The lion is not quite as wide at the zygomatic arch as the grizzly bear is. So there's that. And then I want to compare here we go. You can see these are now in the same point, like they're in the same line. So essentially they are at the same distance away from the camera. So you can see the bears, obviously the bear's bottom jaw is a lot larger, a lot taller, but the bear's skull compared to the lion's skull is just larger in general. Of course, the brain area is a bit chunkier. Lion has a larger sagittal crest, and the lion has canine teeth that protrude farther down on the lower jaw there, and of course larger eyes. But this is our comparison between the two in size. And then if I flip these around, you can see here they are facing each other. So both very impressive animals, both extremely large, and both easily capable of killing a human. So there they are, these two apex predators. Super powerful, super massive, and extremely dangerous. So that is the grizzly bear compared to the African lion. And again, these are both maximum size individuals. Normal individuals would be smaller than this, especially the bears. Normal grizzly bears would be a lot smaller at an adult size. This is like a massive, massive grizzly bear. The lion is just a bit bigger than the typical male, but essentially you're not going to find very many males of this size. So, but yeah, very large, very deadly, and again, essentially easily fit down around my throat or my neck and just completely kill me like that. So super brutal, but that is how wide these guys can open their jaws. So lion and the grizzly bear, both very massive. But yeah, this is the comparison for this video. So thanks guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.